Today I'm going to discuss in a little bit more detail about the three options that you have besides using OEM parts. Stick around. Welcome back. Today we're going to discuss in a little bit more detail about the three different options that you have besides using OEM parts. As I've covered in the last video, we talked about PMA parts, EASA Form 1 parts, and the OOP or owner-operator parts. Okay, let's begin with the parts manufacturer approval process or the PMA process. We're going to cover four different areas here. The first one is the FAA guidelines. The second one will be the design approval. Number 3 is the production approval. And number 4, the EASA position on FAA PMA parts. There's a lot of people out there who thinks that an FAA PMA part is not accepted by EASA. That is completely false. So let's begin with the FAA guidelines. Under FAA guidelines, there are two orders. FAA orders 8110.42 and 8120.22, which basically prescribe the approval procedures for the FAA personnel who's performing the review, and then the guidelines for applicants in the approval process. FAA PMA parts can only be installed on a particular type certificated aircraft. There are three ways to get PMA. The first one is by identicality. The PMA part is identical to the original approval holder part. The second one is called identicality by licensure. The applicant has obtained a license or the right to use the part data from the original approval holder. The third one is test and computation. This method comprises of one or a combination of both of the following methods: general analysis and comparative analysis. Production approval is issued by the Manufacturing Inspection District Office of the FAA. When a PMA part is manufactured, there has to be a specific marking on the part. This is in accordance with 14 CFR Part 45, Section 45.15. The parts can be sold for use on specific type certificated aircraft. A PMA is not transferable. Now let's talk about the EASA position on FAA PMA parts. Basically, the PMA holder must meet one of three criteria. The PMA part can be accepted provided that the part meets one of the three conditions. Condition number 1, the part is not a critical component. Or the PMA part holder must meet condition number 2. The PMA part conforms to design data obtained under a licensing agreement from the holder of the FAA design approval. Or the PMA holder can meet condition number 3. The PMA holder can show that the part has received an explicit approval by means of a design change or STC from the agency. So again, you have to meet one of these three conditions in order for EASA to accept the PMA part. In conclusion then, as far as FAA PMA goes, I would like to share this quote. The fact is, PMA has become a globally accepted alternative. As competition heats up for the operator, the distance between the cost of doing business and the profit from that business is shrinking. Also a fact. The one cost that owner-operators have found they can control somewhat anyway is the cost of the part for maintenance through the use of PMA. The stigma of PMA equals unsafe has been challenged and refuted, and not by anecdotal journalism, but through hours and hours of safe operation, much to the annoyance of the OEM. Well, I also subscribe to this statement. Now let's talk about the EASA approved parts. We are going to be discussing the EASA organization, the design approval process, the production approval process. If you look at the chart of the EASA organizational structure, you're going to see that there are basically two organizations that's going to be involved. They're circled in red, and that's the design organization and the production organization. So when it comes to approving parts, the first step is that the part has to be approved by the design approving organization of EASA. This group is called Part 21 Subpart J organization. The Part 21 Subpart J organization is responsible for approving the design drawings, which also includes the bill of materials required to produce the part. In addition, the Subpart J organization will have to witness and approve the test results. For example, if the particular part consists of plastics or any type of a flammable material, they may have to go through a flammability test, and the Part 21J organization will have to witness that test, obtain the test results, and approve them or disapprove it if the test fails. Once the organization accepts and approves the design, typically they will issue a design letter or a design approval letter to the applicant. The production approval is the responsibility of the EASA Part 21 Subpart G organization. This organization is responsible for auditing the production facility, the tools, and the qualification of the staff. Also, the Subpart G organization will have to conduct an audit and approval of the first article for the part being produced. If everything looks acceptable to the Part G organization, an EASA Form 1 is issued, and this EASA Form 1 accompanies all the parts or all the newly manufactured parts prior to delivery. Okay, lastly, we're going to talk about owner-operator parts, or OOP, covered under the FAA FAR Part 21.303. It's a provision for an aircraft owner or operator to be able to produce parts for their own maintenance or for the purpose of altering the product. When they say product, they're referring to any part of the aircraft, whether that be seats, galleys, lavatories, engine parts, or any structural parts of the aircraft. Now, if the airline or operator does not want to produce the parts themselves, they have the option to issue the authorization to another company to produce the part on the airline's behalf. Obtaining OOP does not require the holder to go through an FAA PMA process. So there's no FAA PMA process involved in producing OOP parts. Again, as I mentioned before, OOP parts can only be used and consumed by that airline. The part or parts cannot be sold to anyone else. And most important, the part must meet all the safety and test requirements of the FAA. There's no shortcuts, as I mentioned before. So these are all what you have to do in order to meet the guidelines of the FAA for the production of owner-operator parts. Before I forget, one of my followers in LinkedIn sent me a text with regards to the use of PMA parts. He wanted me to make sure we cover this topic, and that is, what happens if you install a PMA part on, for example, a passenger seat? Will that void the TSO of that seat? Well, that's a good question. If the passenger seat is a 9G seat, it really doesn't matter which component you modify on this seat, and there's really no limitation. You can use PMA parts. There's no issue at all. It is when the seat, for example, is a 16G seat. This is where you have to be careful. You cannot replace the bottom cushion of that 16G seat unless you perform the dynamic test. On 16G seats, replacement of any of the components is not a problem. But the minute you replace the bottom cushion, for example, with another cushion that's been PMA'd, it will require dynamic testing. It can be costly to do that, especially if you don't have the volume to support or to justify the cost. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But you can replace the plastics pretty much everywhere on that particular seat. The arm caps, the tray tables, the end bay, there's no issue. Thank you, by the way, for that comment. Hopefully that helps. And I hope you now understand a little bit more about the three different options and how you can apply them and what you could do with these options for you. Hopefully it'll help you out and save you a lot of money. So again, see you next time. Thank you. God bless.